Hello and welcome to a bonus episode of the Underworld podcast. I'm your host, Sean Williams. I'm coming to you from a bright and sunny Berlin for once. And I'm joined this morning by Chris Summers, who's a longtime crime reporter from the UK and editor of the Total Crime website, which has a ton of stories that Chris has reported over the years. So check it out. We'll put the link in the description for this show. But here, Chris today is here to talk about a pretty grisly murder that happened in London on Christmas Eve 2019. The details of which spilled out a trial this February when a Swedish Albanian music mogul was gunned down in front of his wife and young daughter. So first of all, welcome to the show, Chris. And can you tell us a little more about this terrible killing?
Yeah, thanks. Good morning. How are you doing? And yes, I'm in London, and that is where this terrible crime happened. In Battersea. I don't know if you know that, just on the south bank of the River Thames. Quite, I read up about it, and it used to be back in the day. It was a really working class area. It had a communist MP in the 1920s. Then all the sort of industry closed down, and it is in recent years very, very gentrified. And now you got sort of £1 million or £2 million townhouses, etc. So that's where it all took place. Yeah.
I remember my old man used to do a lot of building work in Lavender Hill, which is just around the corner from there. And it used to be, like you say, pretty working class sort of row house sort of area, and then loads of big high rises shooting up on the Thames in the last few years. And that is kind of no mistake when it comes to this story, right? Because the guy who was murdered was extremely affluent, like I said, from the outset, or on the surface, working in the music industry, but that wasn't quite all that was going on, right?
Yeah, that was very much his cover story, but I'm not sure if it even set, been inside a music studio or a recording studio. And that was his cover story, that he was supposedly a music promoter. I don't know. He might have put his name on some, nightclub promotions, but that was not where he got his money from. He was a drug dealer. He was an international drug dealer of quite some scale in an organization. He was part of an organization run by a guy called Daniel Petrovsky, based in Malmö, right in the southern tip of Sweden. I previously only ever heard of it because I know they played Nottingham Forest in the European Cup final of 1979 or something, and I think that was their only claim to fame until this case, which has sort of got them publicity for all the wrong reasons, really.
Yeah, we've covered some of the Swedish gang crime on the show. Pretty crazy stuff. Loads of sort of homemade bombs and grenades getting chucked through homes and roadblocks and all kinds of insane stuff happening. I think like 15 years ago or 20 years ago, they had a famous biker war between, I think it was the Hells Angels and the Bandidos, that was crazy. That was like firing, getting hold of rocket launchers and firing at each other's clubhouses, and a lot of people killed. But this, nowadays, apparently Sweden is a hotbed of organised crime. The statistics I was seeing earlier this year, I can't remember them offhand, but they've had a staggering amount of murders. Usually gun shootings, gangland killings just this year. You just don't associate that with the land of ABBA and IKEA. It's bizarre. No. Well, I mean, so Flamur Beqiri, that's the guy who was killed. That's his name. And can you tell us a little more about? There was a gang war, right, that had been going on for some time between him and a rival in the Malmö Underworld. Tell us how it kind of reached this boiling point at Christmas Eve 2019.
Yes. So Flamur Beqiri, who was better known as Alex, he was part of Petrovsky's organization, Daniel Petrovsky, who was like the boss. And they were feuding with a rival drugs gang. led by a guy called Amir Mekki. And I think they were based more in the Stockholm area, but also Stockholm and Malmö as well. I think they were a slightly bigger organization. They also had ties with Ridwan Taghi, who I'm sure you listeners, friend of the podcast, maybe. He's a big time Dutch Moroccan gangster. And Amir Mekki was a friend of his, actually supposedly called him Patron, so he actually sort of deferred up to him. So Petrovsky and Mekki were at war with each other. Apparently it began when Petrovsky's brother was kidnapped by Mekki's gang. Not quite sure what the point of that was, whether they were sort of just scaring him, or whether they planned to kill him, or whether they got some sort of ransom out of him. But they let him go. But Petrovsky was absolutely raging about that. He was furious, and he hit back. He killed 3 of Mekki's men in a cafe in the center of Malmö. And then, then it was to and fro, and then Mekki again attacked a guy called Naif Adawi, who was a friend of Beqiri. Sorry, there's a lot of names coming up, people with them, and they're probably struggling to keep up. But that was quite a key case, because they came for Naif Adawi. He was a close friend of Beqiri, and tragically, he was, being attacked in front of his wife and young baby. He apparently dropped the baby and ran off, and his wife got shot and killed. Carolina Hakim. So it was a terrible case. And I think after that, Beqiri just was, really scared. He fled to London. He moved to London, and was sort of hiding out to some extent at the time of the murder.
Yeah, so he was living in this pretty affluent part of London, just across the Thames. And yeah, by all accounts, it seems like in the events leading up to his death that he was very aware that he was a wanted man. He went to a fancy restaurant on Sloane Square the night of his death, which was Christmas Eve 2019. And he wouldn't even enter the restaurant at first, right? He got his girlfriend to enter first, take a photo. He looked at the photo to make sure there were no sort of enemies in the room, and then he came in. But on the way back, everything kind of fell apart. So can you tell us who was involved in that and how the actual murder took place?
Yeah, his wife Deborah, I was in court when she gave evidence, and she was very cagey. I don't think she wanted to really. She was sort of basically kind of denying that he was a gangster or playing it down significantly. But she did say that, on the night of the murder, he went to this French restaurant in Sloane Square, made her go in, scope the place out, take a photograph. Then he only then came in. But on the way back, they picked up their 3-year-old son, and this is about 9:00 in the evening, Christmas Eve. So it's one of the sort of happiest times for especially families, children getting excited about Santa Claus visiting, etc. And they're just walking down the road, because the CCTV will stay with me for quite a long time, I think, having seen it in court. They they were walking down the pavement with both holding the little boy's hand, and they come up to the gate of their house, which their rented townhouse, and Beqiri goes to open the gate, and as he does that, this dark figure steps out from behind them and just starts firing away at him. Shot, I think it was 8. I think it was 10 shots in total. 8 of them hit him, and he was never going to recover from shooting in such close range, point blank range, and his girlfriend is sort of screaming. There's audio on the CCTV, which is quite rare. so you could hear her screaming, and she's trying to shield the boy while this dark figure runs away. And from that, the police had to unravel who done it, what it was all about.
Yeah. And who, there was a kind of hit team, right? There wasn't just the guy that pulled the trigger. There was a whole sequence of events going all the way back to Sweden. So the guy who actually committed the killing himself, who was he, and how did he sort of scope out, or how did he case the area before Beqiri's death?
Yeah, it was quite amazing, really very good police detective work that sort of figured this out so quickly, but also a bit shoddy slapdash criminals. They hired a couple of guys in London who didn't properly clear up, so that helped the police. But yeah, so the police eventually, the key to it was that they found this apartment nearby, which so the killer, who turned out to be a guy called Anis Hamisi, he had run down the street, then got on a push bike, and he cycled about half a mile away to this apartment, and then he goes in the apartment, and a few hours later, he comes out, gets a taxi to the airport, and flies back to Sweden via Copenhagen, because apparently that's the easiest way to get to Malmö is via Copenhagen.
Go across the bridge, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And then, so the police, when they found this apartment, they found DNA, and they found little scrap of an air ticket or a booking, which had his partial name on it. So they were very soon onto him and another guy called Esteban Pino Munizaga, whose DNA was on the flat. There was, beer cans and Pepsi and, stuff that hadn't been properly cleaned away, a half-eaten apple. All this stuff was supposed to have been got rid of by these two guys that they hired in London, but apparently they were off their head on drugs that Christmas and didn't get around to it. All they did, they got rid of the suitcase and the gun, so that was disposed of. But loads of other evidence was left there. So the police, working with the Swedish police, were working on this and working out. They obviously worked out who Beqiri was and who he worked for, and then how it was linked to the feud. So they knew Meki is behind this, even though they never found any direct evidence linking him. But he obviously got people under him to organize it. So eventually there was 4 people in the dock, Anis Hamisi, Pino Munizaga, and 2 other guys, Tobias Anderson and Bawa Carrere. And all of them had played a part in this very bizarre conspiracy, which involved, latex masks to hide the killer. So it was quite a complicated conspiracy.
Right, and I think it was on you produced a short documentary about this that I was watching, where the killer Hamisi, he used this latex mask. He tried to disguise himself as a street sweeper, right, in a couple of days before the killing. But one of the local residents, because this is sort of a gay community, I guess, in American terms, they said, "What the hell are you doing here?" So he just wandered off, and he'd come back in another latex mask disguised as a sort of old fella, just in a normal jacket. It was all sort of rather schlocky James Bondy style disguises and stuff like this. And so he pulled the trigger. So we've got Hamisi actually is the trigger man. We've got the guy who came along with him to London, who stayed in the flat, the Cuban, not Cuban, Chilean, Swedish guy. And then we've got these 2 local gangsters who were hired by the Swedes. to clean up the apartment, but they were off their nut on heroin, I think it was. And
one of them said,
exposed the gun in the briefcase, which is, I guess British quality isn't what it used to be. So what ends up happening in the spill out from this killing then, before anything goes to trial? I think that one of the guys actually ends up fleeing to Egypt. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, he's a key figure. So Bauer Carrere, who I mentioned just a minute ago, he ends up getting acquitted. They had quite a good defense team, but he also had quite a believable narrative, which obviously the jury believed, which was that he was sort of manipulated by his cousin. He was quite a young guy. I think he was only about Bauer Carrere was only about 21 at the time. He had an older cousin called Ahmet Carrere. They were of Kurdish background. I mean, as you know, Sweden has quite high immigration, and people have come from all over the world. Like you say, Chilean, Hemisi, I think, is from Morocco, I think.
Yeah, I think that's the one, yeah.
And also, so the Carreres are from the Kurdistan or Turkish Kurds. And this guy, Ahmet Carrere, he was the one who Meki got to coordinate the whole thing. So his hands are all over it. And he had apparently, as Bauer Carrere said, he'd manipulated him. He told him, "Oh, just go to London for me. You can have a nice trip to London, all expenses paid. You stay in a flat, and you can have some shopping money. And all I need you to do is to help. They're going to do a burglary. Somebody's going to do a little burglary job, and you just need to, be on hand to hand them stuff." Originally, the plan was to hire a car, but that never happened. So he was a bit suspicious, but he said, "Oh, okay, all right then," and he went over there. And it's only when he comes back that he suddenly realizes, according to him, that there's been a murder nearby, and he's sort of implicated in it. The apartment where he'd been staying was all was all very key to this murder, and he's suddenly like panicking and like, what have I got myself into? And he confronts Ahmet Carrere, and Carrere says, "Oh, I was tricked. I didn't know this was going on, and it's all gone pear-shaped." And then, in fact, after that, you mentioned bombings. Ahmet Carrere's family, several of their apartments are bombed. We're not quite sure who was behind that, whether it was the Petrovsky gang or whether it was somebody, Meki maybe, trying to intimidate him and tell him to, keep his mouth shut, or somebody even trying to kill him. But yeah, and then a few months later, he goes to Egypt. Ahmet Carrere goes to Egypt and is then arrested there on a charge of drug dealing or bringing drugs into the country, etc., or trying to bring drugs out of the country. Not sure. And then it all gets very mysterious. He makes a couple of phone calls back to Sweden, and then he just disappears. He supposedly the detectives hunting him down, because obviously they would have put him on trial. But they sort of follow. Where's he gone? And they check with a Swedish consulate or embassy in Cairo, and they say that the Egyptians told them that they put him on a plane back to Sweden to deport him. But there's no record of him getting off that plane in Sweden. So it's a massive mystery where he's gone, whether he's paid somebody in Egypt to bribe his way out of prison and has then gone into hiding. There's a heavy suspicion that he may have been killed by Meki, because obviously he was the only person who, if he'd ever been put on trial, could have said, Amir Meki made me do this. He's the guy, but ultimately behind it. So maybe I've watched too many crime films, but surely that's what happens, isn't it? They stab you in the back and they get you to do stuff and then kill you.
I mean, when it comes down to Swedish gang crime, pretty much anything's on the table from what we've been discovering in the last year or two. Because when I first saw that this guy who was killed was named Beqiri, I assumed that it was something to do with the Albanian mafia in London, which is sort of taking over the local cocaine trade. But actually, this is something even stranger than that. It's a Swedish gang war that is coming to the doorsteps of London. And so what has happened since? Have you heard anything about any of the rumblings in the gang world since this verdict was handed down? What was it now? A couple of months ago. What about Meki? What's happened with him? Is he sort of in custody or under supervision, or has anything happened to him so far?
Yeah, you're right. Actually, in this case, for once, the Albanians are not involved. They're innocent. Yeah, well, there has been. I mean, the gang war has calmed down considerably. I mean, completely. But that's only because everybody was taken into custody and they're charged. And Petrovsky was arrested, and a whole load of his gang went on trial for. I think they went on trial for the cafe murders and some other stuff. And Meki, he flew to Dubai, famous hangout of all criminals. If in danger, go to Dubai. But Dubai seems to be slowly sort of shifting, actually, because there's this stuff on Daniel Kinahan. They've now frozen his assets. And I think, not sure if Dubai is going to be long-term the place for criminals to hang out. Because I think in Meki's case, they extradited him to Spain, where he was also wanted. So in Spain, Meki apparently ran a gang of killers, hired killers, who would do jobs, I think, for other gangsters. They were nicknamed Los Suecos, which is Spanish for the Swedes. So they are going on trial later this year with a couple of those murders. So yeah, Meki's gang is slightly dismantled, and so is Petrovsky's. But like you say, there's many more gangsters in Sweden, and plenty of people are going to fill that vacuum.
Yeah. I mean, so you covered it at Southwark Crown Court, the trial.
Yeah.
Did anything come up that surprised you during that? I mean, was anyone's testimony particularly poignant, or did anyone strike you as credible or not? Understand?
Yeah, well, I mean, Bauer Correa, like I say, he gave quite a credible defense. I was manipulated. Then there was this guy, Tobias Anderson, who he came over as just a really kind of fairly dumb. Maybe that was what he was. His act was, I'm just a dumb druggie. He was a sort of, I don't think he was an addict. He more of a sort of weed smoker.
Right.
He had a few sort of drug convictions, but he was not a big time player. And again, he was offered like trip to London, do a bit of donkey work, and he did stuff like he went to Argos, which is a store your British listeners will know.
Explain Argos to Americans.
Yeah, Argos and a crime story. Who knows? He went to Argos and bought a litter picker, which was handed over to the hitman as part of his disguise. I'm a council litter picker, going around cleaning up the streets while actually, doing surveillance on the house. So, it seems weird to bring somebody all the way from Sweden just to go to Argos and buy a litter picker, but that was his main job in the conspiracy. And he got acquitted as well. But yeah, Hemisi himself, I think his evidence was quite fascinating, because we were wondering, is he going to give evidence? Is he not? We hoped, obviously, everybody hopes, crime reporters hope that the guy goes in, gives a story, and he did, and it was good tale. It was interesting. It was absolute bollocks, but it was good. He basically, firstly, he had an EncroChat phone.
Oh.
So he had an encrypted phone, which allegedly that's how he was being told what to do. But he gave the police the PIN number, and it was it's heavily suspected that was actually the panic wipe number. So when they got the phone open, there was nothing on it. I'm sure he knew what he was doing there. And he then said, "Oh, I had an EncroChat phone because I was involved in some sort of deal with a guy in Sweden for prescription drugs. So it was a drug. I can't remember the name of it, but it's illegal. It's illegal in Sweden, but legal in Britain. So he was apparently, dealing in this very kind of minor, I think probably about Class C drug. And that was his reason for having an EncroChat phone. And then he said he came to London because he'd met a girl on Facebook, a girl called Nadine, who, I was personally painting a picture of her, as some stunning, he said she was a 22-year-old Arab girl who lived in London. She had British family. And they've been talking and maybe FaceTiming and stuff. And she said, "Come over to London. You can stay in my friend's apartment. We'll just watch a bit of Netflix and chill." He was obviously thinking, "Oh, I'm in here. This is going to be good." And that's why he came over. And he met some guy who she said was her cousin, who gave him the keys to get in. He spent a few days there, did very, very little, and then went home in the middle of the night on Christmas, the early hours of Christmas Day, and then suddenly realised, because she never turns up at the flat. She sort of stands him up. He calls her a couple of times. She gives reasons why she can't come round. So he's stuck on his own for about 4 days in his flat. Then he says, "Oh, bugger this." He goes back to Sweden and suddenly realises there's been a murder. And, oh no, I've been fitted up. It's all made to look as if it's me, but it wasn't. I was there to meet Nadine, but he couldn't find any proof. He couldn't. There was no proof of this mysterious Nadine. There's no Facebook messages, nothing on his phone, no text messages, not even a picture of her. So,
poor
story
guy.
sort of fell apart a bit.
Yeah. Poor guy's been catfished then, obviously.
Yes, exactly. That's what he was basically saying. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Well, Chris, I'd love to get you on to hear more stories about the stuff that you're reporting, because you do a lot of stuff on total crime. And I think this is particularly fascinating window into a gang war that had gone on, the tale had gone on way back into Sweden, which is something that I think our listeners are really, really interested in, because it just blows your mind, the kind of stuff that's going on. So in broad daylight as well. I think a lot of the killings in this case have gone on right under the noses of the public. I mean, they're not being carried out, under cloak of darkness in alleyways. They're in the middle of cafes in the middle of town and whatnot. Where can we find other work that you've been doing, other stories that you're working on, Chris?
Yeah, you mentioned the video. So me and a friend have done a 10-part series called London Crime Stories, which is on YouTube. So this was one of episode. There's 2 more to come. Some of them are kind of well-known stories, like Sarah Everard. Others are very or lesser-known stories. They're like crossbow killings and some of the implications, some of the sort of less reported implications of those things. So yeah, you can check that out on YouTube. But then totalcrime.co.uk, because I couldn't get the .com when I set up the website. That is my website, and it's got a whole. This sounds really weird, but it's got a whole load of databases of homicides, murders, and manslaughters that I've kept up to date, starting in 1990. Although there's a few before that, but mainly in the last 30 years. It's quite a lot of detail. Strangely, I get emailed from time to time from people who are involved. Somebody says, either, you've got somebody's age wrong or the date of this murder wrong. And I said, who are you? And that was my dad who did that murder, or was the victim, or whatever. Or sometimes people say, I'd like to know more about this case. You know, I had somebody the other day who said, you've got a case up there from 1987 or something. Do you know any more details about it? Because I found out that was my father. You know, I was adopted or whatever, but that person who carried out that crime was my biological father. So, yeah, it's quite poignant, some of the people you contact. I've got loads of other stuff on there. And I try to do at least one article, new article a month. I've got the latest one is specifically about EncroChat.
Okay, that's something that pops up in a hell of a lot of our stories as well. So that'll be interesting.
There was somebody, 2 guys convicted. I was jailed on Friday, last Friday gone, for a conspiracy to murder, where pretty much all the evidence was EncroChat. You know, if that had been thrown out, they would have walked. But,
okay. Yeah. Well, Chris, cheers for your time today. It's been a pleasure to speak to you. And I'll throw a link up to all of your stuff when we put this out as well, so everyone can have a look at Total Crime. But yeah, Chris, have a great day, and I guess we'll be in touch about more crazy stories in the future.